We're going to be putting forward measures that will directly help Canadians, measures around affordability, measures around continuing to deliver on improvements in healthcare that Canadians are so urgently needing, and measures that will continue to create great jobs for Canadians right across the country.
Okay, it's budget season. That means it's time to speculate. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has been meeting with stakeholders, and my next guest is one of them. He spoke with the minister just yesterday. Goldy Hyder is President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. We have reached him in Washington. Goldy, thanks for being patient with us with the breaking news. You're framing this budget as a critical budget in a critical moment for Canada. What are you hoping to see on March 28th?
Well, a response to the fact that the world is a serious place. I mean, events continue to transpire. We're seeing what's going on in some of the banking system, the implications of that more broadly, perhaps. We're obviously mindful of the ongoing war in Ukraine, the geopolitical situation. So there's a lot going on, and it's a serious time, and the budget has to reflect both the seriousness of the moment, but also the commitments of the government that it made going back to the fall economic statement, in which it's got at least 20+ measures that need to be implemented in this budget. And so we're looking to see that take place, because time's not our friend. We need to act with some urgency. We need to act with some ambition, and in a very deliberate way, David. And I think Canadians need to be engaged in this discussion. What do we want to be when we grow up? How are we going to grow our economy? How are we going to lead the world in the transition? What are we going to do to make sure people can get through some of the economic challenges that we're facing? These are serious issues that require a collaborative approach to building a stronger Canada, quite frankly, in a very complicated world.
I like the way you frame that. What do we want to be when we grow up? Because the U.S. has decided with the Inflation Reduction Act, it wants to be the destination for global capital when it comes to the clean transition. Canada's not going to be able to compete dollar for dollar with the sheer volume of subsidies and incentives included in that act. So how do you suggest that Chrystia Freeland responds to it, given the limitations of the Canadian fiscal situation relative to Americans' might?
Yeah, well, you're right. Look, obviously, we're not going to be able to just print money the way the United States can. We're not the global currency, and they're not worried about deficit and debt down here too much. So we've got to at least be proportionate. It's part of the message we've given the government. If the Americans spend $10, we're going to have to find one. We're going to need to make sure that we do that. But that's insufficient. We also have to package the rest of the opportunities for Canada in terms of playing to our strengths, David. I mean, our human resources, our immigration system, the capacity to bring in labor. This is one of the great strengths of our country, and it's supported by all the major political parties, which is pretty unique around the world, and we should celebrate that. We need to make sure that we play to our natural resources strength. We talk a lot about oil and gas. A Prime Minister spoke about it today himself, that we have to be both addressing the traditional resources as well as the clean transition that's underway. It's not an either or, it's an and that means making sure we're a destination to attract capital, as the government's is going to point to with Volkswagen and getting the Cedar LNG project done, and I hear Michelin made an investment. But what business looks at is, can that capital get the outcome that it's here to do? We want to make sure that we are a country that is building trade-enabling infrastructure, expanding trade-enabling infrastructure from our ports to our railway system to our roads. You got to be able to get the product out to market, and you can't just get it down to the south. So that's one component of it. The second component of it is to make sure that our response basically says to the Americans, friendshoring and nearshoring cannot become America-shoring. We've got to make sure that we are a partner in terms of our ability to supply the critical minerals that are available, the energy that's available, the food. And that's part of the message that I'm hoping Prime Minister Trudeau is being able to give the President on his visit next week.
I wonder, you mentioned Volkswagen, and there is yet to be revealed federal contribution to that to get the Gigafactory into the St. Thomas area. I wonder if that is going to be sort of direct deals with companies, sort of the way they respond to the Inflation Reduction Act. Because I had one government official describe the American approach as like a big net that catches everything, whereas Canada needs to be more like a harpoon and spear the big fish that they can land and get them in. I mean, do you see that being the path forward?
Well, look, I know that it's dangerous to use phrases sometimes like industrial policy or having to pick winners and losers and so forth, but the moment actually requires leadership. It requires us to be deliberate and intentional in that question not just asked. What do we want to be when we grow up? We feel we should be playing to our strengths, our natural resources strength, our human resources strength, Canadian access to markets, 1.5 billion people around the world, the fact that we're next to the G1. Make sure we're part of that supply chain. Don't let it be that Canada's isolated when we've got the G1 right next to us and their economy needs what we have. So we've got to make the case for the infrastructure. Just today, I believe, a transaction of the Canadian Pacific Railway acquiring a Kansas City now has one railway system, at least, that goes right from Mexico through the United States to Canada. We need more of that kind of integrated infrastructure, and that's a message that we can deliver to the President, that a strong America actually comes from a strong North America. And when it comes to subsidies and the idea that Canadian businesses are being, or businesses around the world are being attracted, that's table stakes now. We've got to play that game. I know it can get politicized. It's not the business that we're in. But Canadians need to realize that those investments that governments, federal, provincial, make are actually about job creation. The investment that's coming in here is going to create jobs. It's going to create prosperity for Canadians and opportunity for the next generation of Canadians to stay in Canada instead of having to leave and go work somewhere else.
Right, and Vic Fedeli was on the show yesterday, the economic minister in Ontario, and he made the point that this race for these investments there's a limited time window, and that's why they need to move so fast and make the commitments. But hanging over all of this, Goldy, is inflation, right? And the cost of living challenges and the risk that if you do spend to respond to these moments, you can make things worse. So how does Chrystia Freeland thread this needle in the upcoming budget?
I think that's the right question in terms of threading the needle. We spoke with the minister, and she herself acknowledged the need to balance this. We get it. Look, business will certainly be supportive of measures that are targeted in addressing affordability for low-income Canadians and otherwise, and I suspect there will be some of that in the budget, because budgets do spend money. What we don't want the budget to do is be inflationary in terms of its impact. Now is not the time to just keep spending, certainly because it's borrowed money in a time of rising interest rates, which will ultimately come back to hurting Canadians, because it will end up cutting services, as we've seen in 1993. So yes, target spending for low income and those who have affordability issues, but this is not a time, as I said, to be spending money willy-nilly. Let's be focused, let's be targeted. And many of the things that I've mentioned earlier about the Inflation Reduction Act, David, I would say, and we said this to the government, there's a lot of programs that exist in government. They're spread out all over government. Now's the time to consolidate them. Be a leader, pull some things together. Recently, they supported the supercluster expansion. We've had 5 of those. I use that as an example to say, you know, the right answer would have been to get rid of 2 and put the investment of those 2 into the 3 and really get specific in picking some lanes and working more broadly, not just with business, but with our unions, with our Indigenous communities, and particularly with the academics, colleges and universities, to say what kind of labor do we need, what kind of skills development we need. It's a need for a long-term economic growth strategy. That's the moment we find ourselves in here, and I hope we rise to it.
All right, Goldy Hyder, we always appreciate the time, and book some time with me for Budget Day. Goldy Hyder is the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Thanks for joining us, man.
Good to be with you, my friend.